Welcome back to Leaders Recon on the Road. Today we're talking a little bit about aviation with our own Chief Gatrost, DC Army National Guard, who went from, I believe you told me once, truck driver to aviator.
Yeah.
So, you know, what's a fun, unusual fact about you, Chief?
I don't know if it's fun, but I suppose the my kind of pathway in the military has taken me through all the compos. So I started in the reserve as a truck driver, went via an active duty transfer through flight training. Spent 7 years on active duty and then transferred over to the DC Guard. So essentially went from Compo 3 to Compo 1 to Compo 2. So I've kind of hit all
everything,
all the hot spots for the Army.
So you've had quite a little path there then. Can you tell us what that story was like from, you know, entry into the military to becoming an aviator?
Yeah, so I grew up in the Midwest, like in Iowa, Nebraska kind of area. And coming out of high school, I wanted to go to college, I wanted to pay for college. So I joined the reserve, kind of limited on where you're gonna go or who you're gonna join, because you kind of got to be central to whatever unit's near where you're going to college. So,
okay.
Like I said, 88 Mike through basic training and stuff. Was in the reserve for about 10 years, did a bunch of deployments. On my first one though, I quickly realized that it's better in the sky than it is on the ground. So I seen helicopters flying overhead from the get-go, and I started making plans to get there. So as soon as I got done with college, I put in my warrant officer flight packet, and I did that via an active duty transfer. So that was actually a very interesting scenario. I don't really know too many people that have done like a compo change with a flight training. And you know, it was funny, like who cut your orders at the time? Like my losing reserve unit isn't gonna send me to flight school when I'm going on active duty. So I essentially had to go to MEPS to go to flight training. So that was an interesting story.
Sounds like there's probably a lot of paperwork snafus there.
I didn't get paid for like 6 weeks, and then got back paid, and like all the things, you know, everybody was like, well, who is this kid? What's he trying to do here? What's he doing at Fort Rucker, Alabama, flight training right now? So
now, once you became an aviator, you did that in the active component for a little while, or when did you make that transition to the Guard now? Yeah, so
as soon as I graduated candidate school, like I said, it was a reserve to active transfer via flight training. So I initially went through flight training in late 2011, all the way through 2012. And then upon completion of flight training, my first duty assignment was out in Hawaii for 25th Infantry Division, 25th Combat Aviation Brigade, air assault, doing all the air assault stuff you can think about, rappels, paradrops, helocasts, putting guys on the X.
And you got to live in Hawaii. So,
and I got to live in Hawaii. And I got to deploy from Hawaii too, and did the Operation Pacific Pathways stuff.
Okay.
And then my second tour after that was here at Fort Belvoir for the VIP unit, where we primarily service Secretary of Defense, Secretary of the Army, basically anybody that's not the POTUS or Vice President, bunch of 4 stars, you know, all the VIPs out of the Pentagon. And then when my tour was up there, you know, I basically walked down the street, said, hey, DC Guard, are you looking for pilots? They said, heck yeah. So here I am in the DC Guard now.
Now, how is the op tempo with the DC Guard on the aviation side?
Yeah, so really op tempo for aviation in general is high. So they're already on a pretty condensed timeline as far as deployment cycles, you know, a lot shorter cycles than other kind of branches, and you know, a lot of guys are doing 5, 6, 7 years in between deployments, but aviation assets are always required everywhere you go, especially medevac, and just transportation in general via air assets. So not to take away from the whole, you know, Capitol insurrection riot stuff, all the headline stuff that's been going on over the last year in DC. So we're right in the middle of that too. So there is quite a
because that's kind of a unique role, right, in DC Guard, because there's like no governor, so you have a little bit of a different role.
Yeah, the DC National Guard is unique in that the governor is not in our chain of command. We basically report directly to Secretary of Defense. You know, that's some higher echelon stuff for me. You know, I'm just the guy wiggling sticks and making the blades turn.
So getting back to the aviation piece, I guess then, you know, I have many times looked up and been like, man, I would love to be flying above all this shenanigans. You know, what are some of the basic prerequisites that you have to even be considered to be an aviator, for like age and so on?
Yeah, so all the stuff that if anybody wants to become an aviator is pretty much clearly outlined on the United States Army recruiting website. Obviously, there's some things that are kind of unique. You're gonna need a Class 1 Army Aviation flight physical, and you can get those from any place that has flight medicine, most major installations. And if there's an aviation unit on the installation, there's going to be a flight doc.
Okay.
Scheduling that is always difficult if you're not an aviator, and you know that's one of the hurdles, right? Obviously, there's a flight aptitude test. When I took it, it was called the AFAS, but it's called the SIFT now,
okay.
And it's a little different. It's kind of about like spatial orientation and how you see shapes and stuff and things like that. But passing that is a prerequisite to becoming an aviator.
And this is just to even put your packet in. So just to clarify, you said, like, is there any age brackets that you know of? I know those might change from time to time, but.
Yeah, there are. I haven't looked recently. When I went through, I think it was 36, but we were growing, and I think it's back down to, I think 32, I want to say,
really?
But that's clearly on the website. But that being said, waivers are available for almost everything. So there are age waivers, like that stuff still exists, and I've personally known people that have been selected at 46 years old. So
wow.
You know, there's active federal service requirements. I think right now they don't want you to have more than 8 years, I want to say. Once again, still all on the website. I'm not the source. That, you know, that's the official source, is the recruiting website, but that does change as time goes.
So, and is there any rank requirements? I know, like, both for officers or for enlisted personnel that are wanting to become those warrant officers?
So there is no rank requirement for a warrant officer. There's actually no feeder for aviation either. So normal tech warrants or ground warrants, as we say, have feeder MOSs. So if you're an Intel guy in a 35 series or whatever, and then you want to become an Intel warrant, there will be specific stuff. You need to be an E6 staff sergeant. You need to have 8 years of Intel on your belt or whatever. The thing is, there's nothing enlisted side in the military that equates to being a pilot. There's no, like, I was a baby pilot, now I can be a big boy pilot. Like, even being, and we all appreciate our crew chiefs and everything, but like, they don't fly a plane or a helicopter, so it doesn't really translate. So that being said, there is no feeder. So it is completely acceptable to be 18 years old off the street and become a pilot and be a W1 with no background experience.
So, yeah, I mean, you could be like an E2 coming in and put in your warrant packet then, or is there?
Sure, you could be an E0. You could not even be in the military and become a warrant officer and be a pilot.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
So that's really interesting. So then, I guess, can you walk us through then, like, I guess from your experience on I know yours was a bit unique scenario, but what it looks like, you know, hitting all those gates from, you know, entrance or interest in becoming an aviator to becoming a warrant officer at the school?
So kind of a couple different scenarios. When we talked about the street to seat stuff, I think, you know, for me, where I kind of grew up in life, like there wasn't like aviation around, and, you know, there wasn't helicopters flying over my head in the cornfields of Iowa. So like I didn't really kind of get it. But as I kind of grew a little bit, I'm like, wow, that seems like a really cool thing to do, and something that I strive for. So a lot of people in my community were enlisted prior. I mean, and a multitude of MOSs. I mean, anything you could think of. So, I mean, you got a bunch of 11 Bravos, there's 88 Mikes, there's, you know, food service, whatever you were doing before.
Yeah, I met one of the warrants outside who had his CIB, right?
Yeah, yeah. So we have some old guard guys in here that, you know, Tomb of the Unknown Soldier and all that stuff, and doing some pretty high speed stuff. A lot of Rangers, long tabbers and stuff come over to the aviation side, after grinding it out for 12 years and being an E6 or E7 and getting their self beat up. They said, maybe I have to put the ruck in the back of the helicopter instead of on my own back. You know what I mean? So a lot of that happens too.
So just to clarify, so you're interested, soldiers interested in becoming an aviator, well, whether they're just entering or whether they've had some experience, they need to get a couple of those prerequisites done, like the SIF tests, like the flight physical, and then they just put in a packet to. How does that work, or is it different depending on which state you're in?
Yeah, so, and it depends on your compo too. So if you're doing it on the active side, it's all through HRC. So, and if you are enlisted, there's some like kind of the standard stuff, like your NCO last 5 for whatever NCOERs, APFT or ACFT or whatever the new jazz is for that, and And
do you have to get a letter of recommendation? I heard something about that one time.
Yeah, so. If you are already in, and you're doing it through the enlisted side, you're gonna have a letter of recommendation from your company commander, your battalion commander, and a senior warrant officer in the field and obviously my field is aviation, so
okay.
You're gonna look for those letters of recommendations. For the guard side, it's pretty similar. If you're already in the guard, you're still gonna need all those letters of recommendation, still gonna need the flight physical, you're still going to need all that stuff, but you're going to be boarded at your state instead of boarded at HRC or something, in a larger entity. Those announcements come out to every state as needed, right? If they don't need pilots, they're not going to announce for pilots, but many times they do. So usually you see them, at least where I'm at, twice a year or so, and
okay.
And so you'll see them, you see the announcements, you'll see all the stuff that the state specifically requires for the packet. But all the stuff there is going to be at least what the minimum is for like big Army, right? So you're still going to need the SIF test. You're still going to need none of that stuff's ever going to get waived. And then they could also want more stuff too. Your state could be very selective, especially if they have many applicants or they anticipate many applicants. But they'll board it, OML it, and they say we can take 5 this year or whatever, and then if you're in the top 5, you're going,
So then I guess what's the flip side of that? Fun fact, I took the SIF test in ROTC, mainly because my buddy really wanted to go to flight school, and he was like, do you think that's a hard test? And I was like, I don't know. So I just took the SIF test. So passed though, first time go. Okay. So I guess I'm on my first step there, but what does that look like for officers then, is there can you transition as an officer once you've already commissioned into a branch to aviation, and then also what does that look like if you're just a newly commissioned officer in the Guard?
Yeah, so if you are a newly commissioned, so same thing with we'll start with the second part of that question, but if you are trying to become a commissioned officer and you're doing the ROTC route or OCS route, it's still kind of the same thing. There's still like a board that's held at the state level, so it's important to find a state that's looking for aviators, and almost all states are at some point. It's just how long you're willing to wait or whatever, and really making that introduction and connection with everybody, and then putting your packet in, and the same stuff will be on there. It's just your commissioning source is different. So instead of through candidate school, warrant officer candidate school, it's either through OCS, ROTC, or those means. And then as far as rebranching is a thing, and that's the same thing for all branches. I mean, you could go from infantry to armor if you wanted to, but you could go infantry to aviation if you wanted to as well. Kind of the same thing though, you're still looking for people to bless off on that, and that might be a little bit more difficult because technically you're poaching from one place to put you in another place, so kind of depends on strength on both sides and stuff like that. And it's not unheard of. I've seen people do it, but then as an O grade, you also kind of want to think about your career trajectory. Like, how long have you been doing infantry, and do you want to start to be a new pilot as a senior captain? That might not be, have you held company command? Now you haven't held aviation command, and there's definitely some questions.
Nuances to each one.
Yeah. So
So then I guess, so from the guardsman perspective then, I know that you find that unit that accepts you either side, whether it's the warrant side or the O grade side. What is, what's the next step from there? I mean, you go to, I'm guessing, flight school, and where is that located?
Yeah, so once your application is blessed off, signed, and you're accepted, then you're going to start the whole flight school pipeline. So this will start with a PCS to Fort Rucker, Alabama, the mighty lower south of Alabama. It's hot, muggy in the summer, and it's cold for PT in the mornings in the winter. It doesn't make any sense. But
how long is that?
So it varies, because flight school essentially is just that pipeline. It's about 5 or 6 different courses.
Okay.
So they call them bubbles. There could be anywhere from, and they're condensed now, but you heard horror stories, well, not horror stories, but you heard stories of 10 years ago where people had months in between these courses. So that would drag it out to be 2+ years. But I think everybody's kind of getting through there now, and anywhere from like 14 to 16 months or so, 13 to 16 months. Because if you only have a week in between, you're getting through.
So it's like year and a half is what you're saying.
Yeah,
okay.
About a year, probably less than a year and a half, but somewhere around there, yeah.
So, and real quick, so once you've gone into that pipeline, I know that there's additional service requirements or ADSOs for aviators. Does that hit when you sign up for aviation, when you graduate the pipeline, and what are those requirements like right now?
Yeah, I wish somebody would have told me this. Not that it would have made a difference to me, but sometimes this stuff is kind of hidden in some regulation. Right now, all the additional or active duty service obligations, ADSOs, are on completion of flight school. So for me, it was 6. Now it's 10. So it's 10 after flight school. So
10 years?
10 years, yeah. So if you do 18 months of flight school, you got to understand that you're signing up for 11.5 years of the Army just to go on the active side. The National Guard, it's not an ADSO, but it's an RDSO, which is the same thing essentially, but it's still 10 years on the backside of flight school. So
10 years after you become an aviator.
After. Same thing, even with that stuff though, is the stuff's kind of ever evolving, and they're trying to, the Army tries to keep you and lock you in, but then sometimes that turns into people hesitant to get in, and so then they say we need to recruit more. Well, maybe if we, and you see this like kind of this whole slinky thing of stuff. So it's always one of those things. Look, find the latest and greatest regulation, because as smart as Chief is, I'm not a book of regulations.
I don't know. I feel like every chief's a walking regulation.
Yeah, I try to be humble, but it's all locked in.
So, getting back to the flight school piece of it.
Yeah.
I get my letter rec. I'm accepted into a unit. I finally get to fly helicopters, which is what I really wanted to do this whole time. How does that, you mentioned it's like 5 or 6 different schools.
Yeah.
Is that dependent on your airframe, or how does that work?
No, it'll all be the same amount of schools, just the length of the last one is going to be different. So you're going to start out as a warrant officer. You start out with candidate school, and that's 5 to 7 weeks, depending on if you're at E4 or higher. Okay. If you're a later rank, then you get a shorter, like a 2-week shorter course. Following that, it's BOLIC, so like kind of the same officer stuff, and you learn staff functions and all the good officer stuff, and that's I think when I went through it was like 6 weeks. Same thing, stuff kind of changes.
Okay.
Following that, there's kind of a like the G.I. Joe school, so you do the dunker stuff where you get dunked in a simulation cockpit into a pool, and you learn how to like swim out of a thing with your eyes blinded and all this stuff.
Oh, that's fun.
You do like the centrifugal stuff where like they make you hypoxic and make you feel like you're drunk in the sky or whatever, and you making crazy decisions. And then you go through SEER school, survival, evasion, or resist and escape. So eating bugs in lower Alabama for several weeks. And
how was that?
It was fun. It was a great school. It's great. But that school is about just over 3 weeks, I think. And then After all that, after all this, so that's already probably 4 months of your pipeline.
Yeah.
Still haven't even seen a helicopter yet. So you finally got through candidate school. You finally got through the officer stuff. You finally got through the bug eating stuff. Then you get to touch a helicopter. So you start with contact and primary, and that's flying the trainers that are down there. In my old days, we used to fly the TH-67 Creek helicopter, which is a fantastic bird. They just recently retired it. Super sad about that. And now the trainers are actually all Lakotas.
Okay.
So they're
Yeah,
flying.
see, I thought I read about that.
Yeah. So they divested that. They're all Lakotas down there. And then and that's basically maneuvers, learning how to hover, learning about airspace, learning the basics of being a pilot. And that 8 weeks-ish, I want to say. Maybe 12, depends. But following that, then you're going to go into instruments where you're going to learn how to fly in clouds and navigate via no spatial orientation, but purely on instruments in the cockpit. You're going to go through that, and that's a real eye opener, even though you can't see anything. And then once you complete that, you go into your advanced airframe.
Okay.
So from here is where, if you're on the active side, like you put a wish list up, and active don't care. So they'll say, you'll say, hey, I want to fly Chinooks. And active Army will say, we have 8 Blackhawks and 7 Apaches. And you'll say, I want to fly Chinooks. And they'll be like, we've got 8 Blackhawks and 7 Apaches.
And then so on the active side, once you committed to an airframe, then that's your airframe. Is that correct, or?
So you'll go through the pipe, you continue, and you'll do the advanced airframe qualification, and you'll go to a unit and you'll fly that airframe. But it's not uncommon for people to switch airframes as well too.
But so for those of us in the Guard, though, I'm assuming when we get that letter of acceptance into that unit initially, that unit's already going to have an airframe, so we're just dedicated then to whatever our unit already flies.
Yeah, National Guard will stand up in the same selection room, at least 7 years ago for me now, in the same selection room, and just tell you they're going to fly a Chinook. So like it's kind of silly, but yeah, they already know what they're going to fly.
Okay.
Good for them.
So looking back at that school then, what was the most challenging part of it, of the pipeline, and for you?
I'd say the flying portion, like all the stuff before, all the officer stuff. I mean, at the time I was a senior enlisted, so like I kind of knew, I knew the Army. I've been in the Army for 10 years. I know all this stuff, and I know how candidate school's like gonna look, and doing all this stuff and the PT and all that. But learning a whole new trade was very difficult. Not only was that difficult, but the intensity of what you're doing it. So in all those schools, you kind of do this thing where you're up like 5 in the morning on the bus to the flight line. You're going to the flight line, and then you're wiping the cold out of your eyes, trying to wake up, trying to shovel down some coffee or something. And then you're flying, trying to figure out how to hover or whatever you're doing at the time. And it's like already mentally exhausting. And you do that till like lunchtime. And then you get done with that, and then you take the bus back to the academic center, and then you sit in 4 hours of class where they talk about weather and turbulence, and they talk about aerodynamics and how blade foils work and how dissymmetry of lift happens, and like all this like next level stuff. So that's like a super exhausting day. And you do that for like half of it, and then it swaps. Then you do all those academics first thing in the morning, and then you go to the flight line in the afternoon, or you're flying at night, like till 10, 11, midnight, depending on when the sun goes down.
I think you told me once, it's like flying a helicopter is like just beating physics every day.
Yeah. It's not like a plane where it wants to fly. We're continually trying to beat physics into submission so that we can stay in the air. And we do it successfully.
So what would your advice be then to, if, soldier going into flight school, what's your advice to them on being successful, or what things should they focus on ahead of time maybe?
I'd say just stay focused. I mean, that's pretty generic, but, setting up study groups and just having kind of a core. I mean, you're going to make friends with everybody that's there, or, your kind of group of classmates. You kind of lot of y'all stay in the same classes and kind of stay through the whole time, and people kind of shift a little bit depending on seat slots and stuff, or somebody gets sick or whatever, you know. But you'll kind of be there PCS with the same people like the whole time. So it's important to find the right group of people that aren't partying on the weekdays, you know what I mean? Like, obviously have your personal time and have your good times when you can, because life is short. But like the guys that are hitting Wing Wednesday every single Wednesday probably, you know, aren't going to keep you focused on, you know, passing the exams and hitting all your goals.
Is the washout rate pretty high?
I don't think it's high. I think everybody that's there is there for a reason, and that's kind of it goes back to the selection process, right? So there's a reason why there's a minimum GT score. There's a reason why there's a SIF test. There's a reason why we look at NCOERs and, you know, past accomplishments and stuff. And you say, like, this guy is a motivated person. This guy or gal is a motivated person. They should be successful in it, because the Army doesn't want to wash somebody out after spending $1 million on flight training to them. You know, I mean, it happens, but the Army doesn't want to see that because it's a bad investment, right?
Yeah, so. Absolutely. So once you've completed that airframe specific flight period or flight training at the very end of that course, do you go to an additional training for National Guard, or does the National Guard have specific advanced level flight training past that initial training?
So after flight school, there's nothing specifically that you are required to do, I guess. Okay. So you're going to go back to your unit, and even when you do your advanced airframe at Fort Rucker, okay, they're teaching you the operator level stuff. So they're not teaching you like mission level stuff mostly. So a Black Hawk's a good example. So a Black Hawk is like a multi-role aircraft. So what medevac pilots do is vastly different than what,
which is what we got here, right?
Yeah. Vastly different than what air assault pilots do, vastly different than what VIP pilots do, right? So it wouldn't be cost efficient for Fort Rucker to teach you, here's how you do air assaults, and then you go to a medevac unit. So that's why when you come out of flight school, you go to a medevac unit and they teach you mission tasks. So, or you go to an air assault unit and they teach you mission tasks. Like, that's for the instructor pilots at your unit to teach you. So there's that additional training, but that's just called progression training. You get to a unit, nobody expects you to be a super pilot when you get there. They're there to make you the best pilot there. That's all in pursuit of making pilot in command, because ultimately, like, you want to be the aircraft commander. And then from there, you know, it's just the next thing is air mission commander, mission briefing officer, flight lead, doing kind of next role stuff. Ultimately, as an aviator, we have what are called tracks. So right now there's 4 tracks for aviators. And that's going to be your instructor pilot, maintenance test pilot, safety officer, and aviation mission survivability officer.
And is that same on the warrant officer side or the O grades?
Technically, O grades can go to those tracks, but they don't typically, and it's not really a thing for them because officers are doing officer stuff, right? Making all those PowerPoints. No, but I jest. No, but so for us, you know, what do you do besides fly a helicopter and golf? Hopefully nothing, but the Army doesn't like that answer. Yes. So they find ways, and it's important, right? So instructing and teaching the new guys out of flight school how to safely handle a helicopter and stuff. Being a maintenance test pilot, you know, all the stuff that not necessarily breaks, but goes into phased maintenance. So, you know, every 7 days, this lube seal needs to be checked, or this, you know, widget needs to be tightened or whatever.
After that's replaced, those maintenance test pilots are running it out?
Yeah, checking it out, doing the stuff. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that, you know, that's kind of wizard work to me, but they'll bend these little tabs on the airfoils and like make it, you know, not vibrate me to death or whatever, and they do all that stuff and they check the stuff off, sign the stuff off, and put it back in service or whatever. So there's stuff like that. Safety officers, you know, doing all their things, all what you can imagine OSHA and safety stuff do, and then air mission survivability officers kind of basically work for mission survivability, so defeat and threat, you know, a lot of bad enemy stuff out there that, you know, we work to make TTPs and different types of tactics to defeat enemy threat.
Now, how does that work? So you're saying a lot of that initial, like, you know, subject matter expertise you're getting as a pilot is coming from those flight instructors at your unit, depending on your mission set. You know, when you came out of flight school, what was your airframe?
Yeah, so when I first went on the active, so when I first came out of flight school on the active side, I was a Black Hawk guy,
okay.
UH-60. At the time, the Alpha Limas, which this is a Lima right here, actually. So I flew Limas for just about a year before we got the Mike models in there.
Okay.
So if you ever look inside there, the Mike model is a full glass cockpit, and there's screens and all the stuff.
Beautiful.
So yeah, it's a little bit. Well, I mean, there's advantages to Limas too, though. So don't let me dissuade that. Flew those, and then I flew the VH-60s down the road here, so the VIP ones.
Okay.
Sweet leather interior and
totally
like
different
a sat phone,
yeah.
and like painted gloss golden black on the outside, and you had to wax it after you flew it and stuff, and did all that stuff. So a plethora of a Black Hawk realm for me. And then coming into the Guard, I was set into a Lakota unit. So I immediately went to the Lakota aircraft qualification course.
And where is that located at?
So the Lakota aircraft qualification course is located in Watts, which is Western Army Aviation Training Site.
Is that a National Guard site?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's a National Guard site down in Marana, Arizona. So out in the desert. It's kind of like an hour and 15 south of Phoenix and probably 45 minutes away from Tucson. So it's just basically out in the middle of nowhere. But you know, you can drive to either.
So does the Guard have a couple of those sites?
Yeah, the Guard has some actually major training sites for aviation. So Watts.
Isn't like 52% of all aviation in the Guard, aviation assets in the Guard? Do you know? I don't know the percentage off the top of my head.
I don't know that number, but I mean, I'm sure it's pretty large. I mean, they've got quite the fleet. The active side has pretty, like, the cabs are pretty robust too, though. So my first active duty company was probably bigger than all of this, just the company. So, but anyway, yeah. So there's quite a few National Guard training sites for aviation. Watts, which is the western one, Eats, which is the eastern one, and that's up in Indiantown Gap. So they got a lot of Black Hawk stuff up there. They got some Chinook stuff up there too. Hats, which is high altitude aviation training site. It's out in Colorado. Okay. So they're all the mountain stuff, you know, dealing with power. So aircraft work a heck of a lot different at 1,000 feet than they do at 10,000 or 12,000 feet. And when you're at 10,000 feet and it's hot, and it's humid, like all that plays in a factor with how air intake works into a combustion engine and how much power you have. So, you know, they're teaching some very fantastic practices out there on how to maintain life and aircraft control. Eats, Watts, Hats, F-Watts too. So then there's the Fixed Wing Aviation Army Training Site, and that's out in West Virginia. So they're doing all the fixed wing stuff and all the planes and jets and stuff.
So a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
So I guess, I mean, we kind of understand the life cycle now, becoming an Army Aviator, which is what the whole point of what we were talking about. But, you know, what's that behind the scenes, you know? So obviously, like, there's some inherent skills being an Army Aviator because you get the aviation skills to transition to the civilian side. I feel like that's like, at least everyone that I've talked to that wanted to become an aviator in the Guard, most of them fly on the private side too, you know, as well as being that M-Day soldier. What's your, you know, what's your thoughts on that, and, you know, what's the good, bad, and the ugly of being an Army Aviator in the Guard?
Okay. Yeah. So obviously you're getting all this multi-million-dollar training for free. Not only for free, you're getting paid to do it. So you're getting these qualifications, these credits, and a lot of the rotary stuff, it can all be transferred to an FAA license. So that's gonna, you know, make you marketable on the outside if you want to go do that stuff. It's a good pipeline to get into the airlines because even your rotary time counts towards the total time required to fly for regionals and mainline and stuff like that. So there's definitely an opportunity. I say the bad, the ugly, I guess, and not so much, but if you're a rotary pilot and you're going into the civilian sector looking to be a rotary pilot, the thing is those jobs just aren't very prevalent, right? So like, how many helicopters fly over your house every day? Not very many, right? Like there might be, if you're in a major city, there's probably a few police helicopters, there's probably a few medevac helicopters, like, and that's
not a
it.
ton, yeah.
So like every year there's hundreds of pilots retiring, competing for this amount of jobs on the rotary side. So it's kind of hard to be competitive unless you have the 5,000, 6,000 hours, stuff like that, and trying to do that stuff. But how many jets do you see flying every day? A lot.
Yeah.
So those jobs are out there.
So you talked a little bit about that piece of it. What about balancing your military and civilian, requirements as a guardsman? Is there a specific amount of flight hours you have to maintain as an M-Day soldier? What does that look like?
Yeah, so that is probably one of the things that people need to think of when, especially if they're joining as an aviator in the Guard, because we still have minimum flight hour requirements. We have the same minimum flight hour requirements that the active side has. So
oh, really?
You don't get a pass because the minimums are the minimums, right? They're the minimum required to maintain proficiency. So you couldn't be like, well, I'm in the National Guard, I don't need to maintain minimums, like I'm just that good. No, like these are the minimums, and that's, for my airframe, it's 48 hours every 6 months. So,
and that's the Lakota now?
Yeah, and it's the same thing for the Black Hawk too, but you kind of do the math and it works out to like a couple hours a week. So maybe like a flight a week or whatever. The thing is you get weathered out, not fly, or you're busy and stuff, and then you need to fly a couple times next week, or oh, I'm on vacation you need to fly several times the next week. And so all this stuff adds up, right? So it's not, aviation in the National Guard is not by any means a 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks a year job. It's a very full-ish, full-time job. There's a lot of stuff going on there. So it's important to know that, to make that decision. Hey, I want to be a National Guardsman, I want to fly a la carte for the Guard. It's not really the way it works. Like, you need to make a conscious effort to like continue to fly, keep your proficiency. And you should want to do that, right? Because I don't want people in the back of my helicopter knowing that I'm not proficient, right?
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
Like
So does it matter what airframe you get on as far as like opportunities in the civilian world? I know you mentioned rotary wing time still counts towards your total flight hours for like the airlines, but is there different opportunities based on if you were flying Chinooks or if you were flying Lakotas, on the outside?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I don't know if one rotary asset is going to be a whole lot more beneficial than the other. I would say like the Lakota, there are civilian Lakotas, EC-45s that operate out in the civilian world as like medevac or as like firefighting kind of capabilities. So that might help a little bit if you're trying to specifically get that. There's not really a whole lot of like Black Hawks and Chinooks in the civilian world, but it still kind of equates to flying some of the similar airframes. Yeah, I don't know if you could say like I should pick this airframe to correlate it with a civilian job of that.
Just
yeah. If anything, jets. Like to be honest, like if you go through the selection process, well, if someone goes through the selection process, and there are times when you go through selection, it's like, hey, we've got 6 Blackhawks, 6 Apaches, and a C-12, a plane. There are fixed wing slots now through flight school. That would probably be the most beneficial if you're specifically looking for like a civilian aftermarket job, I guess.
Okay. So does it matter then? Like, what's the life expectancy of a pilot on the warrant side versus the commissioned officer side? I mean, as a warrant officer, are you flying your whole career? As an officer, are you flying your whole career? Does that taper off? Specifically for the Guard.
Yeah. So on the O grade side, it definitely does taper off, and that you can actually kind of correlate that with flight pay, because flight pay for O grades kind of goes like this, because once you hit like field grade and start pulling like battalion command stuff, like your flight hours decrease, your requirements decrease, and then you're just gonna fly less because you're not gonna be a flight lead of an air assault and a hot LZ, like. So you're kind of in an admin role anyway. You're barely probably pulling minimums. So yeah, as an O grade, you're gonna fly less. I don't know a lot of O grades that do fly a lot. There's probably a few out there that do figure out ways to fly a bunch, but on the rotary side, not too much.
Okay.
Warrant side, you can pretty much fly as much as you want for as long as you want. Really. The only time, like if you make that lightsaber and you make that W5, you probably will be in a staff position that's pretty senior that might keep you out of a cockpit a little bit more, but you could essentially fly for 20 plus years.
Oh wow.
Just cranking it out.
So if I really just want to fly nonstop, become a warrant officer.
Yeah, I mean, say that, but you know, there's some bad that happens too. I mean, when I was my second duty station, active duty, I was in TDA, and we had no lieutenants on our like TDA, so all the platoon leaders were W2s and W3s. So I was a platoon leader, like doing O grade stuff, right? And so there's times as a warrant officer, you're kind of expected to just be an officer too, and sometimes you get roped into being the assistant S3, or you're the L&O for, you know, the field artillery guys, or you're doing some staff stuff. So staff stuff does happen to warrant officers here and there. You know, I'm working at the Guard Bureau right now, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it happens where you kind of step away from the cockpit a little bit, but you know.
So I guess what's your advice then, like looking at, you know, soldiers who are interested in becoming aviators, whether enlisted personnel, warrants, or O grades, what's your advice to them on, you know, how to get started to carry themselves through successfully?
Yeah, so I mentioned before, you know, the checklist on the recruiting website, and I'll tell you, for me, being in a non-aviation unit when I came in, being, you know, far removed, and in Compo 3, which has very little aviation anyway, not even knowing really any aviators, like, it literally started with me Googling, like, Army, warrant officer, pilot, what's up? You know what I mean? Like, and you just stick to the script and you start just cranking out everything on that checklist. I get a lot of times kind of this question in some form or another, and it kind of comes out to be, you know, what's the secret, or like, what's the hookup? You know what I mean? Like, is there a secret? There's no secret handshake or some ring knock that happens. Like, it's not like I can go, hey, this is my best friend, Jarrett, like he's gonna make you a pilot tomorrow. The checklist is there, the documents are there, all the things you need to do. So just start doing the stuff, you know what I mean? Like, get them all done. And then, you know, once you, and some of that is a little bit of tenacity, and it's a little bit of determination, right? The thing is, like, if you're a guy that looks at a checklist and says like, oh, there's 20 different things I need to do here, like, I'm never gonna do this. That's probably not the people we want in the aviation side, right? Like,
you know, it makes sense.
Yeah, so there's a reason why there's hoops sometimes, you know. But even for me as a lowly truck driver, like, I figured it out, you know what I mean? Like, I got a flight physical, even though I wasn't an aviator, you know. I did my flight test when I was in Kuwait, you know what I mean? Like, there's, you know, if you're determined, you'll get it done.
If there's a will, there's a way, basically. So what was, like, I know you mentioned Googling everything, but like, was there a single resource that you went to that really helped you a lot on your path?
Resource, I mean, so just the U.S. Army recruiting website, and it'll tell you like how to do, you know, active to active, reserve to active, you know, all the different pathways like that. And then, other than that, just mentorship. You know, I didn't know a lot of pilots, but I knew warrant officers, right? So, my third deployment, I was part of a joint task force. We had some pretty senior W4s there and stuff, and, you know, kind of connected to them. Most of those guys were like CID or counter intel and stuff like that. But I mean, everybody knows everybody, you know. It's in networking and just, you know, hey, do you know a guy that, you know, might be willing to interview me and possibly give me a letter of recommendation or whatever, and kind of working the system that way. But
well, I guess, do you have any for our audience out there, do you have any last thoughts you want to give that we haven't covered on today so far?
No, nothing out of control. I just say, you know, aviation for me has been great. Like I've worked a lot, I've flown a lot, I've been all over the world in a helicopter and in a plane and in a jet. You know, I've flown all over the islands of Hawaii. I've flown over Southeast Asia and Korea. I've flown the DMZ in Korea, and I've flown over, you know, 100-foot over water buffaloes in the Philippines, and I've flown in the great desert of the National Training Center in California.
Oh, wow.
About 130-degree heat. And I've flown all up and down the airspace within the National Capital Region with, you know, DC, Andrews, Dulles, Philadelphia, New York City. I've wrapped around the Freedom Towers. I've flown around the Statue of Liberty. You know, I've been all over in a jet too, like to Canada, to Mexico, to the Bahamas. So it definitely is a way of life. It definitely opens some doors, and it's definitely exciting for me. Hopefully other people can find their path to it too.
Solid. Well, thank you so much
All right.
for coming on. If you would like more information on any of the topics discussed today, please visit our social media pages in the links below. Tune in to Leaders Recon over the next few weeks as we bring in today's leaders and pioneers to discuss their experiences, share their wisdom, and help you grow as a leader. If you like this episode of Leaders Recon, please don't forget to subscribe below and leave us a 5-star review. You can find us wherever you listen to your favorite podcast.